Imagine serving the best apple pie your family ever tasted, without a single apple, or pouring a glass of Haymaker's Punch that kept harvesters on their feet. By the end of this video, you'll know the forgotten farmhouse tricks: vinegar pies, cracker apples, potato sweets, that turned hard times into heirloom recipes you can make tonight. When money was tight and grocery stores were not an option, farm families learned to stretch what they had. Resourceful cooks passed down recipes that kept whole households fed, using plain ingredients and techniques learned across generations. It is time to bring these treasures back. Let us start with vinegar pie. It sounds unlikely. Vinegar as the centerpiece of a dessert. Yet this Depression-era pie shows how inventive farm cooks could be when fresh fruit was out of season, particularly during winter. The sharpness of vinegar provided the same bright note you would expect from lemons or apples inside a simple custard pie. The trick is balancing that vinegar with sugar and warming spices such as cinnamon or nutmeg, pantry staples that most farm families kept on hand. The outcome is a pie that can surprise you with its apple pie-like character without a single piece of fresh fruit. Families from Appalachia to the Midwest adapted the idea, and some would add a hint of vanilla or a touch of lemon extract when those were on hand. It says something about American resourcefulness that one of the most tart things in the larder could become the sweet finish to a plain meal. If vinegar can sweeten a pie, wait till you taste what it did in a glass. Switchel. Before sports drinks or carbonated sodas were common, Switchel provided a refreshing boost to sustain farm workers through long, hard days. Also called Haymaker's Punch, it combined water, vinegar, ginger, and a sweetener, typically molasses or maple syrup, to deliver hydration and quick energy. Its origins reach back to colonial America, where people noticed that vinegar quenched thirst better than plain water, ginger soothed the stomach, and the sweetener offered fast calories. Brought to the fields in large jugs, Switchel was a harvest-time staple when workers needed regular refreshment. What is striking about this beverage is how it embodies early practical nutrition. Farm families grasped the need to replace electrolytes during heavy labor long before formal sports science existed. Today, as people look for natural alternatives to commercial sports drinks, Switchel has seen a comeback in artisanal food circles. Ham bone soup. In farmhouse kitchens, nothing was wasted, and a ham bone was too valuable to discard. After a holiday meal, the ham was eaten, and the bone, still holding scraps of meat, turned into the base for dishes that could feed a family for days. The method was straightforward and reliable. The ham bone was simmered in water with dried beans, root vegetables, and whatever herbs were available. A long, slow cook pulled every bit of flavor from the bone while the dried beans softened and soaked up the ham's smoky character. The result was a filling soup that delivered protein, fiber, and warmth from a single economical pot. Beyond the practical, ham bone soup showed the frugal wisdom behind farm cooking. It reflected the belief that food was too precious to throw away, and that humble ingredients could yield deeply satisfying meals. That approach to stretching what was on hand helped many families make it through hard times. Corn pone. Before baking powder and eggs were always available or affordable, Southern home cooks turned to corn pone, a plain bread of cornmeal, water, and salt, stirred to a thick batter and either fried in a skillet or shaped into oblong loaves and baked. Corn pone was a substantial partner to beans, greens, or stews, providing satisfying calories and basic nutrition when little else was on hand. Its plainness made it reachable for the neediest families or the hardest economic stretches. Unlike cornbread, it called for no leavening or enrichments, yet it still filled bellies. Some households stirred in a bit of bacon grease for flavor and to keep the batter from sticking while cooking. Corn pone also holds a place in Southern culture and literature, appearing in works by William Faulkner, Mark Twain, and others as a marker of rural life. The phrase corn pone opinions even came to describe commonplace, folksy viewpoints in political talk. Scripture cake. Scripture cake, often called Bible cake, played two roles in rural life. It was both a spiced cake and a clever prompt for Bible study, especially for children. Each ingredient was listed by its scriptural citation only, so the baker had to look up the verses to learn what to add. For instance, Judges 5:25 pointed to butter, while Jeremiah 6:20 referred to sweet cane, that is, sugar. The finished cake was a fruit and nut loaf much like today's fruit cake, but it carried educational and religious weight beyond mere nourishment. It showed how farm families wove faith into everyday tasks, turning ordinary chores like baking into moments of religious instruction. The recipe turns up in community cookbooks from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, particularly those produced by rural churches and women's groups. Potato candy. When sugar rationing arrived during World War II, farm households found inventive ways to make confections. Potato candy began as a clever method to stretch scarce sugar while still offering a sweet bite for both children and adults. The trick was one plain mashed potato. The potato's starch let makers cut back on sugar yet keep the proper texture. Mixed with powdered sugar into a dough, it would be rolled thin, topped with peanut butter, and rolled up into a log. After chilling, it was sliced into pinwheel candies that pleased everyone. What set potato candy apart was not only its thriftiness but how it became a family tradition handed down from mother to daughter, particularly in Appalachian and Southern communities. Even now, many grandmothers prepare this modest confection around holidays, linking today's families to their Depression-era forebears. Soda cracker pie. Farm households valued soda cracker pie because it made use of home dairy and bread without demanding special ingredients. This recipe shows up in American writing from the early 20th century, reflecting how common it was in daily life. Soda cracker pie turned pantry staples, crackers, milk, sugar, and eggs, into a custardy dessert when fruit was scarce. Mock apple pie. During the Great Depression and World War II, when fresh apples were costly or only in season, inventive cooks came up with a striking substitute that reproduced apple pie's flavor and texture using an unexpected ingredient: Ritz crackers. The trick was the spice mix. Cinnamon, lemon juice, and cream of tartar produced a flavor so close to apples that many tasters could not tell the difference. Baked in a standard pie crust with a little sugar and butter, the crackers softened into a texture much like cooked apples. Though the recipe later reached a wide audience when printed on Ritz cracker boxes in the 1930s, it originated in farmhouse kitchens where women experimented with what they had to recreate familiar comforts during hard times. The dish shows how scarcity spurs creativity and how Americans kept food traditions alive even without the usual ingredients. Between us, which make-do dessert would you serve at Sunday supper? Vinegar pie, mock apple pie, or potato candy? And why? I'd love to hear the story behind your pick. Buttermilk pie. On farms where dairy cows were common, buttermilk was a plentiful byproduct of making butter. Instead of throwing that tangy liquid away, cooks on the farm devised tasty ways to use it, including the plain but beloved buttermilk pie. The filling mixes buttermilk with eggs, sugar, a bit of flour, and vanilla to form a custard-like consistency with a mild tang that offsets the sweetness. Baked in a pie crust, it develops a thin, caramelized top. Some versions add lemon for brightness or nutmeg for warmth. Widespread in the South and in Appalachia, buttermilk pie is thrifty farm cooking at its best, turning what might have been waste into a dessert worthy of Sunday dinner or church socials. Even after commercial buttermilk became available, many families preferred the genuine article from their own butter making. Potato donuts. While most modern donuts use a yeast or cake batter, farm cooks created a variation from leftover mashed potatoes that yielded especially tender, moist donuts that kept fresher longer than many standard recipes. The starch in the potatoes helped keep moisture in while allowing for less flour, which made these economical when wheat was costly. Usually seasoned with nutmeg or cinnamon and sometimes rolled in sugar after frying, potato donuts became a special weekend indulgence that used leftover potatoes from the week's meals, especially popular in New England and Midwestern farm communities. These donuts, sometimes called spud nuts, reflect the waste-not approach common in farm cooking. By the mid-20th century, some small-town bakeries focused on this style, though most vanished as commercial donut chains grew. Scrapple. In farming areas where people raised pigs, butchering day produced not only main cuts, but also scraps and organ meats that had to be put to use. Scrapple, closely tied to Pennsylvania Dutch communities, turned those leftovers into a breakfast staple that could keep for months. The method involved boiling the scraps and organs to make a rich broth, then cooking cornmeal and buckwheat flour in that liquid until it thickened. Seasoned with sage, thyme, and black pepper, the mixture was poured into loaf pans to set, then sliced and fried until crisp at breakfast. Scrapple embodies the farm ethic of maximum use, converting parts that might otherwise be thrown away into a nourishing, flavorful dish. Regional variations appeared across the mid-Atlantic states, with some places adding different herbs or spices, but all shared the same waste-not mentality. Chow chow relish. When late summer gardens yielded more vegetables than could be eaten fresh, farm households turned to preservation like making chow chow, a tangy, sweet pickle relish combining many vegetables into one colorful condiment. The strength of chow chow was its adaptability. Recipes differed widely depending on what needed preserving. Cabbage often served as the base, but green tomatoes, bell peppers, onions, carrots, and beans could also be included. The vegetables were chopped finely, salted overnight, then cooked in a vinegar and sugar brine with spices such as mustard seed, celery seed, and turmeric. Chow chow's mixed roots reflect America's diverse culinary heritage. Chow chow traces influences to Southern cooking, Pennsylvania Dutch practice, and Asian pickling methods. Each area put its own spin on the recipe, ranging from the sweeter Pennsylvania versions to the hotter Southern styles. More than a preservative, chow chow brightened winter plates, commonly served with beans, cornbread, and other staple foods. Dandelion wine. Dandelion wine was one of the first signs of spring for farm families, back when dandelions were prized as food rather than treated as a nuisance. The tender greens often went into salads, while the vivid yellow blooms were steeped to make homemade wine, a custom carried to America by European settlers. Making the wine was a communal task. Children joined in picking the blossoms, which were then macerated with citrus, sugar, and occasionally herbs, and later fermented with yeast. The finished drink was a golden wine with a floral sweetness people likened to mead, or a light dessert wine. Because dandelions were plentiful and grew wild, even cash-strapped farm households could enjoy this seasonal treat. Dandelion wine illustrates how farming families lived closely with their landscape, finding edible uses for plants others ignored, and it kept a cultural link to European traditions passed down through generations. Corncob jelly. Corncob jelly is a perfect example of the waste-not-want-not approach in farm kitchens. After the kernels were removed, cooks still found value in the cobs. By simmering cobs in water, they drew out natural sugars and pectin, which, when strained and boiled with sugar, reached a gelling point and became a pale, honey-colored jelly. The method was straightforward. Simmer the cobs, strain the liquid, then cook it with sugar until it's set. The spread offered a gentle corn sweetness that went well with hot biscuits or cornbread. Some recipes included cinnamon or vanilla for extra depth. This practice shows the kind of ingenuity born of necessity. In the days before commercial pectin, farm cooks knew which plants held natural thickeners and how to use them. Corn cob jelly also supplied a wintertime sweet when fresh fruit was scarce, turning what would have been waste into something delicious. Bread and butter pickles. Before refrigeration, preserving summer crops was crucial for surviving winter. Bread and butter pickles became widely made during the Great Depression because they relied on simple pantry items to turn abundant cucumbers into condiments that kept for months. Unlike classic dill pickles, bread and butter pickles marry tang and sweetness with a brine of vinegar, sugar, and spices such as celery seed, mustard seed, and turmeric. The name is said to have come from their role as a sandwich filling in hard times, literally eaten on bread with butter when meat was scarce. Graveyard Stew. Despite its foreboding title, this modest dish comforted generations of farm children and adults. It is essentially milk toast under a dramatic name. Toast pieces are soaked in warm milk, sometimes with butter and a pinch of salt. The startling name simply made it more appealing to kids. Stories vary about the origin. Some suggest the toast looked like little tombstones in white milk. Others say it was a quiet midnight snack eaten as silently as a graveyard. Whatever its beginnings, the dish offered an easy, gentle-to-digest meal when someone was ill or food was scarce. Its cultural value lies in how farm families use storytelling and imagination to make plain food feel special. By giving basic fare a fanciful name, parents turned a necessary meal into something children would accept without fuss. Hasty pudding. A simple porridge of cornmeal cooked in water or milk until thick, fit that knead perfectly. Called hasty because it could be prepared relatively fast, this dish appears in American cookbooks going back to the colonial era. Depending on what ingredients were on hand and the meal's purpose, hasty pudding could be served savory with butter and salt, or sweet with maple syrup or molasses. Hasty pudding links modern Americans to the colonial era. This modest preparation sustained American farmers through the centuries of nation building. Spoon bread. In the American South, corn long stood as the foundation of farm cooking long before European wheat became common. Spoon bread is the crowning example of that corn tradition. It turns plain cornmeal into a light, almost soufflé-like dish that must be eaten with a spoon rather than cut like ordinary cornbread. The method depends on incorporating air into eggs and sometimes whipped egg whites, then folding that aerated mixture into a cornmeal batter enriched with milk and butter. In the oven, it rises dramatically, producing a texture midway between cornbread and custard. Because of its elevated texture and presentation, spoon bread became suitable for Sunday dinners and special gatherings. What is striking about spoon bread is how it crossed social lines. From simple farm tables to elegant Southern homes, the dish was prized across economic divides. Thomas Jefferson reportedly served it at Monticello, while countless farm families reserved it for their own celebrations. New England boiled dinner. In New England farm households, the boiled dinner was the epitome of efficient cooking, a complete one-pot meal that could simmer unattended while other chores were done. Built around corned beef or a smoked pork shoulder, the dish combined meat with cabbage, potatoes, carrots, turnips, and onions, all in a single pot. The cleverness was in the sequencing. The meat went in first to build a rich broth, then root vegetables were added in order of how long they needed to cook, with cabbage introduced last. Everything simmered until tender, producing a balanced meal of protein, starch, and vegetables with very little hands-on work. Beyond practicality, the New England boiled dinner held cultural importance for community life. It became the customary Saturday evening meal in many towns and was closely tied to church suppers and neighborhood gatherings. The straightforward preparation let farm wives join community events while still putting a filling dinner on the table at the end of a long day. Sour milk pancakes. Before refrigeration, milk would sour quickly, especially in warm weather. Instead of throwing it away, farm cooks found that sour milk made excellent pancakes. The acidity reacted with baking soda to produce light, fluffy cakes. These pancakes used staples found on most farms: flour, eggs, sour milk, and baking soda, and could be mixed up quickly for breakfast or supper. Topped with molasses, maple syrup, or fruit preserves, they turned what might have been waste into a much-loved dish. This recipe reflects the practical chemistry farm cooks understood long before formal schooling spread that knowledge. By watching and testing, they learned which ingredients paired well and how to repurpose foods that had changed from their original state. Liver mush. In livestock raising communities, using every part of the animal was both economical and a mark of respect. Liver mush, especially common in southern Appalachia and among German American groups, turned organ meat into a favored breakfast item. The method combined finely minced pork liver with cornmeal, herbs, and spices. After cooking, the mixture was shaped into loaves that could be sliced and fried until the outside was crisp. Often served with eggs or on a sandwich, liver mush supplied strong nutrition from iron-rich organ meat that might otherwise have been discarded. Though organ meats may challenge some modern tastes, this traditional preparation made them appealing and easy to eat. Survives in parts of North Carolina and other southern areas, where a few small-town butchers still prepare liver mush by recipes passed down through generations. Pepper pot soup. Pepper pot soup originated with enslaved people on Caribbean plantations and came into American farm life through cultural exchange. The soup made inexpensive ingredients into a flavorful, nourishing dish that could simmer for hours while other chores carried on. Traditional preparations used tripe, stomach lining, and other offal together with vegetables, peppers, and herbs to build a spicy, full-bodied broth. A long simmer softened the otherwise tough meat and gave time for the flavors to meld fully. American versions often adjusted the recipe to what was on hand, at times substituting salt pork for tripe. This soup stands as an example of the cultural exchange at the heart of American farm cookery, with methods and tastes from African, Caribbean, and European sources mixing as people shared techniques. The dish became especially linked with Philadelphia, though it was made across farming regions as a practical means to use every part of slaughtered animals. Salt rising bread. Before commercial yeast was widely available, farm bakers looked for dependable ways to raise bread. Despite its name, salt-rising bread does not use salt in the starter. Instead, it captures wild bacteria in a starter of potatoes or cornmeal set in a warm spot overnight. The fermentation gives the dough a characteristic cheese-like scent and flavor that sets this loaf apart from yeast-leavened breads. The method demands careful control of temperature and timing, because the starter must be kept steadily warm to develop correctly. Its history reaches back to pioneer times, traveling west with settlers who lacked commercial leavening. The technique was handed down from mother to daughter by demonstration rather than by written instructions, making it a genuine folk tradition with slight variations between families and regions. Tomato gravy. In southern farm kitchens, gravy was served with almost every meal, stretching modest supplies and adding taste to simple staples. Tomato gravy emerged as a way to use a summer tomato bounty in a preparation that paired well with cornbread, biscuits, rice, or potatoes. The straightforward sauce mixed fresh or canned tomatoes with flour, fat, most often bacon grease, and seasonings, then cooked until thick. Distinct from Italian tomato sauces, Southern tomato gravy kept a uniquely American profile, frequently including a bit of sugar to tame acidity. This gravy exemplifies the thriftiness of farm cooking, turning seasonal surplus into a versatile sauce that brought flavor and nourishment to otherwise plain dishes. The preparation crossed racial and economic lines in the South, showing up on both black and white tables and in both modest and better-off homes. Farm communities in particular saw a spring surge in eggs as hens laid more with longer daylight. To hold on to that seasonal abundance, cooks on farms used several preservation techniques, including pickling eggs in a vinegar brine flavored with spices. Pickled eggs. The method was simple. Hard-boiled eggs were peeled and packed into jars, then covered with a solution of vinegar, salt, and seasonings such as mustard seed, dill, or red beets to add color. Stored in a cool spot, these eggs could stay edible for months, supplying protein when fresh eggs were scarce. Pickled eggs also entered social life. They were staples in rural taverns and at community events, where their portable, ready-to-eat quality made them handy snacks. The practice still survives in parts of rural America, notably among Pennsylvania Dutch communities. Molasses stack cake. In Appalachian areas, where sugar was costly and molasses served as the main sweetener, special events required showy desserts that used what was on hand. The molasses stack cake met that need. It is made of multiple thin layers of a molasses cookie-like cake, each spread with spiced apple butter. A distinctive feature was its communal origin. For weddings or large gatherings, each family present might bring one layer to be assembled at the event. The result was a tall, multi-layered cake, reflecting the community's shared contribution. The cake actually improved over a few days as the apple filling softened the firm cookie layers, so it was well suited to make-ahead planning around farm work. Though more labor-intensive than modern cakes, its striking look and deep flavor made the effort worthwhile for important celebrations. Buttermilk soup. Buttermilk soup was widespread in Germanic farming communities across America. It offered a quick, nourishing meal that made practical use of dairy byproducts. The tangy soup combined buttermilk with flour to thicken it, added eggs for protein, and sometimes included fresh herbs or fruit when the season allowed. Sweet versions might include berries when they were available, or dried fruit during winter, while savory takes used potatoes, cucumbers, or sorrel. The soup could be served hot or cold, which made it useful across seasons. Because it called for no meat, it was economical and commonly served on buttermilk days. This dish exemplifies the dairy-focused cooking found in many European American farm traditions. In areas where butter production was important, buttermilk was plentiful, and these soups turned what some might have treated as a waste product into a valued part of the farm table. Leather apples. Farm families used leather apples as a preservation method before modern freezing and canning. They needed ways to keep the autumn apple harvest usable all year. Leather apples, sometimes called apple leather or fruit leather, were an ingenious approach that preserved flavor and nutrients. Apples were cooked down to a thick sauce, spread thin on cloths or pans, and dried in the sun or near a fire until they became leather-like. These pliable sheets could be cut into pieces and rehydrated with water to make pies or sauces, or eaten as chewy snacks throughout the year. What is especially striking about apple leather is how it illustrates pre-industrial food technology. Without electricity, refrigeration, or commercial preservation, farm families relied on techniques passed down through generations, allowing them to enjoy seasonal fruit year-round. Mince meat. Today's mincemeat pies seldom contain much actual meat, but original farm recipes mixed beef or venison with dried fruits, bold spices, and brandy or cider as a preservation method that turned cheaper cuts into a festive delicacy. The high sugar level, alcohol, and spices acted as preservatives, letting the mixture keep for months in cool storage. Traditionally made in the fall when animals were butchered, the mincemeat would age and deepen in flavor before being used in pies over the winter holidays. This practice links modern Americans to medieval methods of food preparation. The blending of sweet and savory tastes, together with multiple preservation techniques, goes back centuries. Farm families kept this practice long after shop-bought preserves were available because they prized the layered flavors and holiday associations of old-fashioned mincemeat. Rivel soup. In Pennsylvania, Dutch farm communities, simple pantry items were combined in inventive ways to make filling meals when meat was scarce. Rivel soup used a method brought from Germany. Small dumplings, called rivels, made of flour, egg, and salt, were dropped into chicken broth to produce a hearty soup that made limited ingredients go farther. The rivels could be prepared ahead of time and dried, so the dish was convenient to assemble quickly when needed. Farm households valued how these dumplings turned plain chicken broth into something more substantial, especially in winter when fresh vegetables were in short supply. This soup is an example of cultural continuity on American farms. The technique came with immigrants from German-speaking parts of Europe and was adapted to available American ingredients and circumstances. Even the word connects back to its roots. Rival comes from the German Reiben, meaning to grate or crumble. Potato stuffing. Before commercially baked bread became common, farm cooks developed stuffing variations that relied less on bread and more on other starchy items. Potato stuffing mixed mashed potatoes with onion, celery, herbs, and only enough bread to bind the mixture. This practical change served several purposes. It made use of abundant potatoes, conserved limited bread, and produced a hearty accompaniment for chicken, turkey, or pork. Because potatoes hold more moisture, the stuffing stayed moist whether it was cooked inside a bird or baked in a separate dish. Potato stuffing was especially popular in Pennsylvania Dutch areas and across the Midwest, showing the regional adaptations typical of American farm cuisine. Each community created its own version, shaped by cultural background and the ingredients most easily obtained locally. Soos, also known as head cheese or brawn, stood as the ultimate example of waste not farm butchery in many places. This cold meat preparation used pig parts that might otherwise be thrown away, such as the head, the feet, and other naturally gelatinous pieces. These cuts were simmered until they were tender. Then the meat was picked free and combined with herbs, spices, and the natural gelatin released during cooking. Pressed into molds and chilled, the souse set up into a loaf firm enough to be sliced and served cold, either as a sandwich filling or as a breakfast meat. Soos illustrates how traditional farm butchering made use of every part of the animal out of both financial necessity and a respect for the life taken. Regional variations produced distinct flavor profiles. Appalachian versions might lean heavier on hot pepper, while Pennsylvania Dutch recipes often included vinegar and sweeter spices. Dried apple stack cake. Dried apple stack cake gained popularity in mountain communities where fresh fruit was seasonal, even though celebrations occurred year-round. Dried apples became the base for special occasion desserts. The dried apple stack cake layered thin, firm molasses spice cake rounds with a filling of dried apples cooked down into a thick, spiced sauce. Like the molasses stack cake, this dessert often required community effort, with different families each contributing layers for weddings or church gatherings. Once assembled, the cake would be wrapped and stored for several days before serving, so the moisture from the filling could soften the cake layers. Using dried rather than fresh apples made the cake available at any time of year. The spices, typically cinnamon, nutmeg, and allspice, helped cover any slight fermentation that might develop in home-dried fruit. Because it was a practical workaround, the dried apple stack cake became so well loved that the tradition continued even after fresh fruit became easier to obtain. These overlooked farmhouse recipes tell us more than how to cook a dish. They show the inventiveness, thrift, and communal spirit that helped families endure hard times. In our modern age of convenience foods and instant meals, these recipes remind us of the creativity that appears when supplies are scarce, and of the deep satisfaction of turning humble ingredients into something delicious. As grocery costs keep rising and more people search for economical ways to feed their families, these time-tested methods provide practical answers wrapped in rich cultural heritage. Perhaps the oldest lesson from these farmhouse kitchens is that abundance does not come from endless resources, but from the skill to turn what you have into food that feeds both body and soul. If this trip through America's culinary past resonated with you, please tap the like button and subscribe for more stories that tie us to our shared roots. Share a comment with your family's forgotten recipes or tell us which of these classics you might try at home. Sometimes the clearest way forward is to look back, carrying wisdom and gratitude for simple, lovingly made food.